Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to today's session on promoting equity in research funding, a discussion between funders and the research community. While unfortunately we're not able to meet in person this year, we're really glad to have this virtual format to reach people from all over the world. We look forward to hearing everyone's contributions today. My name is Sophie Durrans from the Department of Health and Social Care in the UK, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. We have a very interesting lineup of speakers who will hear from shortly. But before we kick off, I wanted to cover some housekeeping items. First of all, please ensure that you use full screen and you use the chat function, which will appear on the right-hand side to ask any questions and engage in today's discussion. We'd also like to learn more about our participants and our audience, so please introduce yourself in the discussion forum box and tell us where you're joining from today. While you're doing that, I will outline the structure of today's session. We'll first hear from 5 speakers, and then we'll move on to a panel discussion and Q&A. Please use the thumbs up voting for questions that you'd most like answered, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible during the discussion. But before handing over to our first speakers, we thought we'd start off today's session outlining some broad concepts that will set the scene for what's to come. As you know, this session is about promoting equity in research funding. But what do we actually mean by equity? Equity is not the same as equality. Equality focuses on giving everyone the same resources and opportunities, regardless of their circumstances. It creates the same starting line for everyone. Equity, on the other hand, has the goal of providing everyone with the full range of opportunities and benefits, enabling them to reach the same finish line. In research, there are many components that make up equity. We won't go into all of these today, but we wanted to give you a sense of some of them. Promoting equity in research means providing everyone with context-specific opportunities to enable them to reach the same end line. And there are many components that are often factored into research equity. These include things such as geography. This might be aiming to reduce disparities between high, middle, and low-income countries, or reducing disparities within countries themselves. It also includes aspects such as gender, disparities at the researcher level, so who is funded, as well as for research participants, and ensuring that gender-sensitive approaches are integrated for both funding and research. It includes things such as age, not discriminating against researchers or participants due to their age, or against disability, recognizing differing needs due to different varying abilities. And when we think about research equity, we also consider career stages, so ensuring that we're providing equitable support for relevant stages of research careers, as well as disciplines, and ensuring that research disciplines are funded equitably and that different disciplines are considered in cross-disciplinary approaches. The following presentations today will touch on some of these aspects in greater detail. You'll hear different perspectives, both from funders and researchers, particularly around improving equity for researchers in low and middle income countries. We'll be posting 2 live polls today. The first we think is already going live, which is around how important is research equity to you personally. Is it very important, somewhat important, or not important? So while you're filling that in, I will hand over to our first speaker, Dr. Val Smullen. Val is the head of Global Health Research Partnerships at the Department of Health and Social Care, where she's responsible for delivering a portfolio of global health research through the National Institute of Health Research, the NIHR. Over to you, Val.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Thank you very much for the introduction. And let me start to share my screen. So thank you very much. And just to carry on where Sophie has already given me a bit of an introduction, I'm really delighted to be the first speaker in our session, Levelling the Playing Field, Promoting Equity in Research Funding, and hopefully prompt and promote this discussion between funders and the research community. So I thought I'd start by giving just a little bit of introduction and background to who we are. So we're the Department of Health and Social Care in the UK, which is the Ministry of Health in the UK. And our funding arm, our research funding vehicle, is the National Institute of Health Research, NIHR. Over the past few years, we've developed still relatively new NIHR Global Health Research portfolio. And the principles that underpin this are explained in these 3 boxes on the right-hand side. This is official development assistance, so it's ODA funding of direct and primary benefit to people in low and middle income countries, which are as defined by World Bank criteria, so eligible for UK aid. Delivering high quality and applied health research aligned with NIHR principles. Those principles are shown on the bottom: impact, excellence, effectiveness, inclusion, and collaboration. And thirdly, strengthening research capability and training underpins everything we do through equitable partnerships. And I thought I'd just give a little bit of background into what we're doing around equity in our portfolio on this and the next slide. So up until a few years ago, the NIHR funded research which underpinned the National Health Service in the UK. So funded clinical, public health and social care research. And the motto at the top there in the top box explains that. More recently, we've been developing global health research portfolios. All our calls through NIHR required a UK administering institution and a UK and low and middle income country joint lead. This week, we're very excited to announce that our first call, which will be open to applicants directly from low and middle income countries, and the awards will be made directly there. That will launch this week, and it's under our right call, which is Research and Innovation for Global Health Transformation. And the topic is unintentional injuries, urgent and emergency care. So please follow us on Twitter, sign up for alerts and more information on that. In addition, we've had a couple of development awards, as we call them, running. The first is under the Global Health Policy and Systems Research Programme. We have 17 development awards, which are planning awards established solely for stakeholder relationship building between researchers with each other and with policymakers and communities. And also, as part of the right application process, proposal and partnership development awards strengthen relationships between researchers as part of that application process. We also have a couple of schemes which hopefully enable more financial ability in both in individual level awards through financial assurance funds, which are specifically for people already awarded with NIHR grants. And also we support the Good Financial Grants Practice, GFGP, for institutional finance and due diligence support. So secondly, I wanted to talk a bit about the funding committee process, as I recognise that sometimes researchers don't feel that they don't understand what might look like a black box of the funding process. And to give a bit of context, our funding committees through NIHR and when we work with other organisations are extremely aware of how the money flows, how the funding flows between different organisations, and also the leadership of applications, ensuring that there is equity in balance. We also look at the actual committee membership itself and ensure that there is geographical and gender balance. Our committee members are listed on our website, the NIHR website, and we have open advertised calls for membership. So please look out for those. One example is linked at the bottom. Our review panels have community engagement and involvement experts sitting on them and look at capacity strengthening and training specifically. And as with all funders, we care very much about using independent experts with conflict of interest policies, looking at unconscious bias, and also various publications where different impact factors may not be the most, impact factor alone may not be the most relevant factor. So as well as working through the NIHR funding agency, from the very beginning of our programme, we've had a lot of flexibility to work with other organisations. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our partnership with the Wellcome Trust a bit more over the next couple of slides. So these programmes, these collaborations have enabled us right from the beginning to directly fund applicants in low and middle income countries without the need for a UK partner. That gives us flexibility and speed. For example, with the COVID-19 research, research has been launched in rapid time to respond to the pandemic specifically for low resource settings through a couple of partnerships that have been set up. And that gives us value for money as we reduce our administrative burden and bureaucracy We leverage each other's funding, and we also increase reach by combining our audience bases, hopefully reaching organizations who maybe have not heard of us before. So I'll talk a little bit about the Wellcome Trust International Fellowship Schemes, which Wellcome has run for many years now. It's dedicated to low and middle income applicants only, and awards are made directly to the institutions of fellows at master's training and intermediate level. So this partnership's been running about a year now. The objectives are to enable joint funding of high quality submissions from a diversity of applicants working in global health research. And we've specifically looked at increasing applications in areas which maybe traditionally we haven't funded quite so much, including mental health, multimorbidity, so non-communicable diseases and chronic conditions, nutrition, snakebite, but these are not exclusive list. We are open to all areas of health research. So we co-fund through existing Wellcome schemes as well as the international fellowships. This includes major awards, and there the research has to be focused on health issues of people living in lower resource settings. And so as part of this partnership, we've been asking ourselves, how does this feel from the researcher perspective? Of course, we as funders seek to establish open and transparent selection processes based on merit. Do all researchers and research institutes feel that they're on what we're calling a level playing field here when they apply? And we wondered about 3 reasons shown in the green box as to why that may not be the case. We recognize that a lot of international research funders have funding open both to their own country researchers, in our case UK, as well as those from low and middle income country institutions in direct competition. We also recognize that in some cases, research institutes and universities linked to, in our case, the UK, have higher success rates than their neighboring institutions. And thirdly, applicants from some countries or some institutions don't apply to us or are disproportionately underrepresented in our portfolio. And we've thought about maybe there's 2 reasons why this is happening. Firstly, at the institutional level, maybe limited grant writing and administrative support in those institutions and less familiarity with funding schemes, how to budget, how to plan the research that is required for a grant application. And also restricted research office support and lack of access maybe to the right mentors or supervisors, as well as sometimes in the facilities and equipment. And then at the individual level, maybe overall writing style, lack of experience with formats, and of course, we're very aware of language barriers, as well as the knowledge of schemes and how they fit to individuals' research and career stage. So together with Wellcome, we've been thinking about, well, practical things we could do to address this and hopefully increase the equity. So one practical way we've addressed this is through 2 webinars, which are available on the NIHR YouTube channel and also linked through the Wellcome website through our partnership page. And one is this introduction to the partnership, the NIHR-Wellcome Global Health Research Partnership, which explains the schemes and opportunities available. And the second is really developing your research career. So it's around grantsmanship. And both those 2 webinars are available, and we're very interested to hear what other topics may be relevant or useful as part of the discussion. In addition, funders have always conducted outreach, as we would call it, and we've been looking at shifting from the things we've traditionally done to more targeted outreach via institutional champions. So what do we mean by outreach? Well, all funders directly engage with potential applicants. We go to visits and conferences. We have stands with flyers. We communicate with Twitter and through our websites. Is this the right approach? Are we reaching the right institutions and researchers? And particularly, can we do this at an appropriate scale and in a sustainable way? And here on the right is one of the flyers that's been translated into French as part of our campaign in this area. So what have we been doing as part of this project? Together with Wellcome, we have designed a set of support. So here in the green is pre-session support, and then feedback and learning from that, which we've been through with a set of institutions, which I'll describe in the next slide. And what have we been providing? Well, we've developed as this pilot program a slide deck with grantsmanship, more information on funding schemes, links to the guidance already on our websites, and also how we can ensure monitoring, evaluation, and learning from these activities. So we're extremely grateful to the 4 institutions and individuals within them who've been very much involved with working together with us to take this initiative forward. And those 4 institutions are shown here. Two of the next speakers are from these institutions. Hesbon and Akin will talk more about the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and the African Population Health Research Center, APHRC, Kenya's experience. We also have the Universidad Peruana Catiano Heredita and the ICDDRB in Bangladesh, the International Center for Diarrhea Disease Research. So I won't steal the thunder from Hesbon and Akin. I will just give some high-level summary information of the lessons that we've learned so far by working with these 4 pilot institutions. So the value of information, we were pleased to hear that just more understanding of what funders' processes and schemes are available was helpful. Understanding the different levels of grants and which might be appropriate for different individuals, as well as the success rate of different regions around the world. We were pleased that these sessions were busting common misconceptions, and in the bubble is one shown there around common misconceptions and the application process. That, for example, that the research funded is not only focused on Nobel Prizes, and actually specifically where we're looking at applied health research, actually other research questions and proposals might actually have more impact or at least equal relevance. And we were glad to get some direct feedback, which we hope this session will really provoke a continuation of, about the need for or a demand for more professional and career planning resources, and maybe examples of what successful applications look like, examples of projects that were funded locally as well, and of course the role of mentors and role models and what the funders' role is in helping support that. So this is my last slide. I would like to acknowledge my colleagues at Wellcome. Daniela Zimmerman was on the graduate Wellcome program. We're very grateful for her energy and expertise in driving this project between us as organizations. And in the top right box is Branwyn Hennig, who's our Wellcome counterpart for this. Sophie Durrans is moderating this session, and I'd like to thank everyone in the institutions, the 4 institutions as well, who really made this program happen so far, and it's very much live and continuing. So as far as this session goes, we're really keen to hear what have other organizations done, funders, other organizations, other institutions in low and middle income countries, and how we can share those learnings. We're particularly interested in scale and sustainability. How can we make sure that initiatives really become the norm rather than focused on small groups or numbers of people at a workshop? We'd love to hear, is there interest in taking this forward in other organizations and institutions beyond our 4 current pilot organizations? And we're keen to hear, please do start putting things in the chat box, future topics for webinars, online engagement sessions. So I'm now going to hand it over to our next speakers to learn more and hopefully shape the discussion, and look forward to an interesting session ahead. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Val, for that overview. And as Val mentioned, if you do have questions or points for discussion, please put them in the box and we'll address them during the next part of this session. And as Val mentioned, our next few speakers will be from the champion institutions that we covered through the Leveling the Playing Field project. And they'll give you some insight into how they found the process. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Hesbon Wow from the African Population Health Research Center based in Kenya, who is a training coordinator there.
Hello, everyone. I hope my slides are visible. All right, thank you very much, Val and Sophie. My name again is Hesbon Wow, and I would like to share APHRC's experience on capacity strengthening and grantmanship in particular. presenting on behalf of my team at APHRC. The people that we worked on this project include Dr. Evelyn Gitau, who is the Director of Research Capacity Strengthening Division. Also my colleague, Dr. Marta Vicente, who is a project manager for CATA, and I'll spell out what CATA means shortly. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Here is an outline of what I would like to cover. APHRC's experience, of course, as I've said, our experience on capacity strengthening. I'll also talk about the Grantsmanship pack delivery that we rolled out, the sessions, how we conducted those sessions. I'll share some of recommendations for funders' consideration before I conclude. APHRC stands for African Population and Health Research Center. It's an international research organization headquartered here in Nairobi, Kenya, with regional West African regional office in Dakar, Senegal. The mission of APHRC is to generate research evidence, to strengthen capacity of researchers, and to engage with policymakers in the area of population and well-being broadly. So consistent with our mission, the largest division at APHRC is research. So as you can see on the slide, under research, we have different units focusing on different areas of research. We have a unit called Aging and Development, and you can imagine they are engaged in aging-related studies. Other units, Education and Youth Empowerment, focusing on education-related research, and the like. We have the Research Capacity Strengthening Division. Again, consistent with our mission, we generate research evidence, then we strengthen capacity of researchers. And so the mandate of RCS, Research Capacity Strengthening Division, is to strengthen capacity of researchers. And we do that through different strategies. I'll talk about that shortly. And then the next division is policy engagement. And finally, of course, operations. So that is APHRC at a glance. Now, I promised to talk about RCS, the Research Capacity Division, and how do we strengthen capacity of researchers? We do this through partnership with universities. One of our flagship program is referred to as CATA, which stands for Consortium for Advanced Research Training in Africa. This is a 5-year fellowship, meaning a long-term commitment by the fellow to strengthen their capacity through partnership. Another program is ADDRF, which is a form of fellowship, but unlike CATA, this one is relatively shorter. So it is a 2-year program, fellowship program. So instead of spending 5 years, we do 2-year fellowship. And this may be a doctoral students in their last 2 years of the program, or maybe a master student, which is typically a 2-year program. So those are 2 strategies we employ to strengthen capacity of researchers. Now, with time, we came to realize that some researchers may not be able to leave their institutions or their work to commit to a 2-year or a 5-year engagement. And so what is out there for them? How can we strengthen their capacity? So the third strategy is through short courses. And that is what we do in the training unit. We conduct short courses in different areas. So it could be research governance, a course in systematic review and meta-analysis. It could be data analysis, whether quantitative or qualitative, and of course, using the relevant software. It could be a short course in implementation research, grantsmanship, scientific writing, and many others. So we conduct those short courses. And by short courses, I mean it could be a 3-day workshop, it could be a 1 week, it could be a webinar, you see, those are relatively short-term commitment as opposed to the first two. So those are the strategies that APHRC is employing to strengthen the capacity of researchers across the continent. So, talking about the Grantsmanship training that we conducted recently, this was a collaboration between APHRC, and as Val hinted, we are one of the champions institutions that are trying to champion this delivery. So how did we do it? That's what I'm going to share briefly. So we sent out a call for application. In the call for application, we described the nature of the training that we were planning to conduct, the nature of participants that we were looking for, and accompanying the call, we required the applicants to complete a short survey prior to participation in the webinar. So we refer to it as a training needs assessment. The purpose of this is just to enable us understand the participants that we'll be engaging with in the Grantsmanship training. Now, what did we find? Over 500 applications were received. So we interpreted that to mean that there is very high demand or need for training in Grantsmanship. So we conducted the training, of course, not with the 520 applicants, but with around 200. And identifying the 200 participants was a decision reached out by, the different organizations agreeing on whom we could be able to manage during the webinar. So what I've presented on the right side is just how the agenda looked like, the areas we covered, and because of time, not to go deeper, but that is the agenda that we guided the training. So immediately after the training, which was approximately 2 hours, we also required the participants to complete a short survey. We wanted to learn from them how the training, how they experienced the training. So I'm going to share some of the findings from that analysis of data we obtained from the participants immediately after the training. So we asked them, what's your reason for participating in the webinar? And content analysis, we summarized this. They said that they wanted to acquire knowledge in that area, in Grantsmanship, or to enhance knowledge, meaning they had something already, they had some content, but they wanted to enhance their understanding. Additional finding, majority, from the findings, from analysis of data, we realized the method of delivery was adequate according to them. The content that we presented was applicable, meaning they could use it to enhance their work, whatever it is that they are working on as researchers. And they also they stated that they intend to apply what they learned during the webinar to their work. And finally, they intend to share what they learned with peers. So that we interpreted that to mean that they received the webinar positively. And if somebody is intending to share with others, to apply it to what they do, that is good news. On the other hand, we also learned that technology interfered with their learning. So technology could interfere in the sense that maybe internet or interruptions and things like that. At least about a quarter, 1/5 stated that. And then a good number also, almost 1/3, stated that the length of the session was not adequate, meaning it was too short, so it was not adequate. We asked them this question, that rate yourself, your overall knowledge in the different areas or topics that were covered in the webinar. So one area or topic that we covered was available funding schemes and areas of particular interest. So we spent time talking about that and engaged in some exercise. Another area we covered was what makes a strong application with reference to the person or the applicant. The next one, what makes a strong application with reference to the environment? And finally, what makes a strong application with reference to the project's research proposal? And finally, what happens after one submits full application? So we asked them, can you rate the level of knowledge in this area before you were exposed to the webinar and then after? So that was our attempt to try to gauge the extent to which there was some change in knowledge or learning taking place. And you can see that majority rated themselves as novice or beginner in most of the areas, whereas after the training, you see majority rated themselves higher, competent, proficient, or expert. So we interpreted this to mean that there was some level of learning or change in knowledge as a result of being exposed to this training. So we also asked them, how can we improve this, for future participants? So in summary, what they told us is, please plan for more time. This one was kind of rushed. If we could give it more time, that would be more productive. Also, offer it regularly. Let it not be a one-time thing and then you disappear. Let's have this regular and space it out. They also recommended that make it in person as opposed to virtual. Of course, we understand now that we are in COVID situation, the in person may be challenging. And finally, they said, make it more practical and interactive. I guess the in-person will allow for more practical and interactive session. In general, one challenge that we can talk about is because of the short-term experience. We did a 2-hour webinar, and then we are asking them to give us feedback. Whatever feedback we were getting is good, but we cannot confidently say that this training impacted them to this extent, or were they able to apply? So those are higher level information if we are thinking about the Kirkpatrick training evaluation. So we were only able to tell how they experienced the training immediately after, but we needed to give them ample time to be able to tell whether they applied what they learned and how useful it was. In some of the recommendations that we could give to funders based on this experience are as follows. One, it is important to fund grantmanship training. Why? Because many participants are interested, but due to lack of funds, they end up not participating. And this we learn based on our experience, because APHRC, remember I talked about our research capacity strengthening mandate. We do conduct different training, including grantmanship. And for us, we do it before engagement or partnership with the NIHR-Wellcome Trust. We do it at a cost. But here, we did not charge anybody. We just did it for free, of course, because we collaborated with NIHR and Wellcome Trust. But our experience is that many people could participate or would like to participate if it is offered freely, and yet that may not be possible. We are also suggesting to the funders that increase the frequency of grantmanship training. A good way to do it, or one of the ways to do it, is if we know, I know that Val just talked about this upcoming call, or maybe it is out, maybe I didn't get it, but if we know that the call is going to be out in November, we precede the call by conducting these kinds of training so that the participants can easily transfer what they learn or apply it right away, as opposed to conducting sending out the call and the training is maybe many months before, because then they are not able to apply the knowledge right away. So those are some of the suggestions that came up. And finally, if possible, let's make this grantmanship training more practical and, if possible, in person. So those are some recommendations. In conclusion, I would say that offer this training regularly, but space it out. 2, consider funding the offering, and we could do this in two ways. We could offer fellowships to participants, and I think that is ongoing, or those are some of the strategies that are now being employed. We could also partner with institutions like APHRC and do this jointly and find a way to enhance participation across the continent. If possible, if we could do it in person, that would be great. However, we also know the limitations currently. And finally, we emphasize on tracking of participants. We would like to know if we conduct a webinar, 2-hour webinar, and people participate, let's say 100, how many of these people eventually submit an application? Let's say 30, then we know that at least 30% were able to submit. Now, of these 30 that submitted, how many were successful? That kind of tracking is important, because then we'll be able to see how we assess the success and even act on the challenges that are encountered, as opposed to just doing immediate post evaluation and not following the participants like that. I guess that is what I wanted to present, and I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, the audience, for listening. I know there will be a session for question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hesbourn, for a really interesting presentation. In the interest of time, we've moved directly on to the next speaker, Dr. Akin Ogdebemi, who is a senior lecturer in aging and neuropsychiatry at the College of Medicine at University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and he'll give you his perspective. Over to you, Akin.
So thank you, Sophie. Let me quickly share my slides. So thank you again, Sophie, Adam's experience with capacity strengthening and grantmanship. I'm an NIHR-Wellcome International Intermediate Fellow here at the University of Ibadan, but I'm making this presentation on behalf of the Faculty Committee on Mentoring, Grantsmanship, and Internationalization, acronym the Sparkling Committee, chaired by Professor Adesola Oguni. This is the outline of my presentation. So quickly, talking about the experience of the University of Ibadan is a relatively old university, and over the years have been very successful in attracting competitive research funding, at least relative to other similar universities in the sub-region. Although most of the funding received by the university have been from the United States, especially the National Institute of Health, but we've also received funding from Wellcome Trusts and other funders. So currently there are about 123 active grants in the university, but most of the grants, 70% of them are in the College of Medicine. Notably, the College of Medicine started as a college of the University of London. So but currently, most of the grant funding are located at the College of Medicine. So some of the top funders of research in the University of Ibadan are the United States National Institute of Health through its Common Fund, Fogarty International Center, and other such, the UKRI, Engineering and Physical Science Council, and also the Medical Research Council. In terms of capacity building experience, it will be important to mention two very important programs, the Medical Education Partnership Initiative of Nigeria and its follow-up program for junior faculty. This is a funding that spanned about 10 years to try to improve and strengthen the medical education system in Nigeria. So many junior faculty here at the University of Ibadan benefited from the program. Specific to mental health research capacity development in Sub-Saharan Africa, the NIMH funded the Partnership for Mental Health Development in Sub-Saharan Africa, The notable thing about all of this research program is that even though University of Ibadan had partners from the United States, all across sub-Saharan Africa and in Nigeria, the university was the lead institution in all of these partnerships. So it was exciting to learn about the NIHR-Wellcome Leveling the Playing Field program, which aim to encourage LAMIC researchers, support LAMIC researchers, low middle income country researchers to develop low middle income country focused research. So they sent some of the materials to that they use or design to try to improve competitiveness of grant application from low middle income countries. So the materials were found useful because they demonstrate the funding opportunities available, which most participants, faculty members here at the University of Ibadan were not really aware of. And also the materials showed clearly the steps involved in the application process. So the 3 Ps, the person, the place, and project, really resonated with a lot of people who got to know about the NIHR-Wellcome Leveling the Playing Field program. And also the mapping of countries of previous successful applications was also very important, showing that most successful applications application, I meant to say, came from East Africa and India, with very, very few applications, successful applications from West Africa. But there were challenges with some of the material. One of them had to do with the fact that they had to be delivered virtually because of the current pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic. And like, will be expected in most low-income settings, there was fluctuating internet, which really affected participation. And also because of COVID, the university was closed. And many people thought that a representative from the NIHR-Wellcome partnership would have helped in giving some kind of institutional backing to the material. So for the webinar that we gave here at the University of Ibadan, the focus was mainly on academic staff because of COVID-19. But in the future, hopefully post-COVID, we're going to open it up to other participants, including students. So the process involved was that we advertised the program and people applied, and application had to come with a concept notes. And after that, we selected participants. We were able to get 10 academic staff participants to join to participate, and the webinar was held virtually and it was interactive. So the feedback we got was mostly positive, and I know of 2 grant applications that came directly from participation in the program. Of course, there were applications to local, national funding schemes. Again, issues around erratic internet and issues around representation by someone from NIHR-Wellcome partnership, at least to just give an introduction to the program before the onset before the start of the webinar. So the recommendation that came from the webinar we organized include the fact that people felt that they needed more opportunity to develop research strengths and capabilities. So there are very few qualified multidisciplinary people here, and people felt that grant that gives opportunity to build networking and collaboration and linkage with institutions with better research infrastructure will really, really help many of the faculty here at the University of Ibadan. And of course, better access to program officers for guidance on the application process. As I round up, I want to quickly highlight some of the challenges to successful grant application from Nigeria. One is the research infrastructure here. Of course, we have talked about internet access and fluctuating internet since I've been making this presentation. And then because of that, people are unable to access online resources the way they should. And of course, the research management office are usually not strong enough to be able to provide many of these online resources, make them available for would-be applicants. And of course, there are very few opportunities for institutional or national level funding. The other thing is that people are mostly not aware of funding announcements. Of course, that's related to the internet problem and also the weak grant offices that are unable to make this information available. And many staff, many faculty have low morale and low motivation to apply for grants because previous failures and of course rumors. So the popular rumor is that if you are not from an institution that is linked to, for example, a UK institution, you are unable to get grants from. So you don't bother, there's really no need to apply. So there's rumor and people lack motivation as a result of this. And of course, even when people are aware of this funding scheme, because of inexperience, they do not have the patience to study the funding call responsiveness to be able to apply appropriately and be responsive to the funding calls. Other challenges include difficulties with putting together a strong research team. Again, I mentioned there are few qualified and experienced multidisciplinary colleagues around. So building a team with compelling CV and also, again, because of this, it's difficult to demonstrate track record of previous funding because very few people have been funded before. And of course, there's limited opportunity to access successful grant templates so that people know how to actually prepare this grant. But apart from that, there's also very weak internal review mechanism or before submission. So because of that, the success rate of this grant application are usually very poor. The other big issue is the issue of protected time. Of course, because of the huge healthcare service gap in most low and middle income countries, including Nigeria, a lot of faculty members focus more on service delivery. And there's very, very little time left for research. Also, many faculty members are involved in clinical practice, involved in teaching and administrative work. So there's really no protected time, for research and writing of, very competitive grant. Of course, also there's limited possibility to take time off research and for writing grants, as I said before. So I would like to acknowledge the Sparkling Committee, the Faculty of Clinical Sciences, and the College of Medicine, University of Ibadan. Also, acknowledgement to the National Institute of Health Research and the Wellcome Trust for this opportunity to be part of this collaboration between NIHR and Wellcome. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Akin. Just before I introduce our next speaker, we have another poll to put to our participants. So as most of you, unsurprisingly, thought that research equity was very important to you personally, we wanted to ask a similar question, but slightly different. So how important do you think it is to your institution? Be interesting to see if the answers change there slightly. But while you're doing this, I'll introduce our next speaker, Professor Tom Kariuki. Professor Kariuki is the Director of Programs at the African Academy of Sciences and leads the Alliance for Acceleration of Excellence in Science in Africa platform. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to be joining this meeting. So let me share a few thoughts about the work that we are doing. Greeting everyone from the African Academy of Sciences in Nairobi. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we have been trying to build research funding in Africa and how we have been moving forward with our discussions with funders and the research community in Africa. And I'm going to base this on the work that we have done with the Alliance for Accelerating Excellence in Science in Africa, which is the platform that we have been built over the last 5 years very focused with a mission to shift the center of gravity for African science. And what this really means is a reference to the fact that we want to build a platform and organizations that are independent, that are African-led in terms of the science, technology, and innovation programs, how we are shaping the science agenda, and how we are mobilizing resources from across the globe in building the priority areas for science in Africa. So our mission has been this shifting of center of gravity for science. And there are three areas of focus for our work: agenda setting and scientific prioritization. Based on the fact that agenda setting, if it is about ourselves and our societies, then I think we should be making precedence over how we set the prioritization and how we set the agenda. A second area is looking at how we mobilize resources across all our partnerships globally, and focusing increasingly also how much more resources can come out of the continent itself. And the third area is how we manage then those programs that are successful in getting resources and funding through the AESA platform, so that they can focus on building the best minds, the strengthening the best possible science environment, how they are going to balance between excellence and equity, how they are going to mentor emerging research leaders, and how we can begin to accelerate the journey that we all want to take to see transformed lives in Africa. Now, over the last 5 years, our strategy and our effectiveness framework has evolved over time, over the last 5 years, from the learning and discovery for the need to build the AESA platform and what it should be doing, going through building our capacities and capabilities for structures and processes. We have been in a mode for fundraising and reporting to the partners who have been generous with their funding, putting it through AESA. That has meant a lot of work building partnerships and working with very many people across the continent and across the world, so that we can then all evolve over time to lead and to become a very strong governance in terms of governance and in terms of the capacities that are in place. So there are these 4 areas of our focus. So for the period between 2015 and 2021, shifting the center of gravity actually have meant that we have these 4 goals of a very strong focus on leadership and environments, on innovation and what we want to call science-driven entrepreneurship. There are examples in all these areas. So for example, if you go with goal number 1, one of those who are from around the world and the continent will be familiar with developing excellence in leadership training and sciences in Africa, deltas, or the human heredity and health in Africa, or the clinical trials community platform. All these are areas where we are trying to build leadership and we are trying to strengthen environment. With regard to innovation, science-driven entrepreneurship, we are very focused on how we cultivate innovations that can go through a continuum of developing them to become enterprises in future. And some of the initiatives that we are currently working to negotiate with a large group of funders and pharma is very important in that sense. In the area 3 is where we're looking at a very specific focus on emerging research leaders, those working on climate sciences, those working in health, postdocs based in Africa, postdocs from the diaspora who want to come back to Africa, how we can build a mentorship, discussions around how do we build mentee mentorship relationships that actually can develop these emerging research leaders on their journey to become future leaders. And the 4th area is the critical gaps in the research landscape, which goes from good financial grant practices to how we then focus on standards and ethics and policies and research management, including how we can work with institutions across the continent that wants to build their research support offices. So in terms of the achievements over the last 5 years, it's everything from how we have then focused on people, places, and programs, and how we have gone into the partnerships and how we addressing priorities. So on the input side of things, and then on the output side of things, we would like to see in the next phases how we get more products, policies, and practices that are actually the best that can be built in various organizations. Just want to focus a little bit of some of the achievements over the last 5 years. There's a lot of data that we have been building, and I reckon we could have 50 plus terabytes of data in many of these areas that are outlined here. Funding, of course, has been a big area of focus for us to mobilize resources for the various scientific sciences and priorities from across the world. We want to see increased scientific quality and productivity, and every document everyone reads about productivity out of Africa, we know that we are not hardly meeting 3% of scientific productivity out of Africa, and there has been some increments, there has been some successes, and there is a long journey to go. Growing African scientists, very focused on women in science as well, a very important aspect of the equity that we have been trying to build. Parity for gender, for example, moving forward with the empowerment and looking at how that achieves equity. And these promoting equitable partnerships do not necessarily just mean north-south or south-south. They also are about a lead institution that is getting into a partnership in a sort of a hub and spoke approach of relationships, or regions in Africa that are stronger in one aspect that are then reaching out to institutions in other regions of the continent, because that then leads us to more productive, impactful intra-African collaborations. And we're beginning to see these sort of intra-African collaborations when we are purposed around building these very connected collaborations across the continent. Yes, we want to continue working with infrastructure and the institutions and centers that are strong, but we also want to build new R&D infrastructure, new science platforms, scientific platforms, those who want to build genetic platforms or molecular platforms or immunology platforms across the continent. We have been concerned about the lack of a huge scientific enterprise. High value jobs seem to be found only in academic institutions in Africa, but we would like to see more industry value jobs coming to Africa, or those that end up in policy, for example, much fewer than we see, for example, the enterprise, the academic flow for high value jobs. And over the last 2-3 years, in terms of scientific priorities, we've been working around almost 15 areas, everything from infectious diseases to mental health, to food and nutrition, to COVID-19 priorities for the continent. We begin to celebrate local and global partnerships that have been enmeshed nicely, and we have anchored AESA platform with all these local and global partnerships. And eventually, of course, is that we will get to this transforming lives by reaching the targets that we hope we can reach over the next 5 to 10 years. I just want to give 2 quick examples of equitable partnerships. So when we get into building equitable partnerships, and as an example, as the clinical trust community as a platform that we started the journey of building it 2 years ago, but we are a very good place right now where there is the platform has been launched and announced, and we are doing a lot of outreach to get a lot of people to come into the website, and we are seeing very good traffic flow into this. But when we think about all the key players that are important, so there are, as we have been trying to get into COVID-19 and asking questions about, is there a contribution when it comes to building vaccines or diagnostics for COVID or other areas of diseases in Africa? So we see there's a huge role, of course, for the clinical trial sites and centers. So what we are offering them at this platform is that they can self-profile themselves, they can state what their experience is, what infrastructure they have, the capabilities, the data that they have, and this they can then be used for their own site visibility in terms of globally for them to praise themselves. We're working with African researchers and leaders who can again do the same thing around profile, collaborations, and training. We're looking at how community members, and we've been focused on forums across the continent as we have done this. The sponsors, funders, pharma are an important part of these discussions. And we are pulling a lot of data from various many collaborations that we have been built for the data for the processes, funders, including J&J, Biopharma, Gates Foundation, and others who are involved in this work with us. But importantly also is we will not move forward without getting the national regulatory agencies and the ethics committees that are important to move this journey of developing a product to all the time when it gets to become licensed or registered for it to be available. And just pulling out a bit of data over the last 1 year, no, less than 1 year actually, when we have been doing this. So what we see is that the numbers can move very, very quickly, because once you get these connected communities looking at how excellence and equity is all being balanced, you see scientists who come in, you see sites that want to be profiled, you see national regulatory forums that want to be on it. We have had all these numbers from ethics committees. We have all of them that are providing their own data, 149 ethics committees that have profiled themselves. So this is, I think, for me, is an example of how you can quickly pull together all the partners, all the institutions, all the national, country level players, and we begin to have a conversation that is coordinated for all of them. Another area to emphasize is that as we have been building these successes over the last 5 years, it has taken building blocks of partnerships with our funders. And every time we have a discussion with our key funders, and there is an AESA partners group that meets regularly, our focus has been around how do we make decisions collectively as 5 or more partners that are coming into that discussion, decisions, transparency and accountability, how we then build our processes and our systems, and learning from what has been done by, for example, whether it is DHSC, NIHR, or Wellcome, or Gates, or others who have been in that space for many, many years. A lot of lessons for us to learn. Advisory with regard to how we go about doing the agenda setting and priorities. The coordination is important, because the more we can become more coordinated, the better we can then begin to move towards impact together. And then there are opportunities when we get together, because that's the time when we can make our requests based on our prioritization. And then as we look therefore finally, as get to the end of this, is to say our vision for the 2030 and beyond is to begin to look at how do we get into improved health across the continent. We have a continent that still has a huge burden of more than 20% of infectious burden of disease, non-communicable diseases, and multimorbidity across many, many other areas. Climate is a big issue for Africa, and how do we protect that? How do we make sure that we don't become devastated by climate change? How do we strengthen governance? And that could be everything from ethics and standards to policies to over the institutional governance levels, to research support areas that can support researchers, and then how we build connected communities across the continent, communities that are connected by technologies, they are connected by agenda setting, they are connected because they are deliverers, they are delivering what needs to be delivered. And for a big continent, very much so important that we build very nicely connected communities. So I want to thank everyone, and we have had a long a long journey over the last 5 years. That's been a good journey to see a lot of support stars who have come forward from across the globe, who has been supporting the AESA platform to get us where we are. Some African partners, but increasingly there is a gap between what resources can come of Africa and the gap that then comes from outside the continent. Will continue to be an issue for us to continue hoping that will continue for the next foreseeable future. So thank you for the opportunity.
Our final speaker today is Carrie Hoff from the Department of Health and Social Care. Carrie leads on monitoring, evaluation and learning across global health research, and we'll be discussing monitoring and evaluation for equity in research partnerships. You'll also be able to find a Slido link in the discussion which she will be showing on the screen shortly.
Thanks, Sophie. I'm just going to share some slides. Great. So thanks to all of the other speakers who've given such excellent presentations so far. I'm going to be moving the conversation on to focus specifically on monitoring and evaluating equity in research partnerships. And I'm going to be reflecting on some of the challenges and opportunities in this area. So just to kick us off, as Sophie mentioned, there is a Slido poll I think has been put into the discussion section. But if you're not able to access that, you can just click on the slido.com link and then enter in the ID number 95320. And there's a question there which asks, what does the phrase equitable partnership mean to you? So this could be a one-word response, it could be a phrase, but I really encourage you to reflect upon your own experiences of working within research collaborations and how equity plays out within them. And we'll be looking at a word cloud of all of the combined responses once everyone's responded. So I'll just give you a few moments to enter in your responses to that. Just a few more moments now. I can see some responses coming in. So some of the key themes that are already emerging from the responses that have been entered so far include balance, respect, fairness, co-production, equal, mutual trust, win-win. So these are all really relevant concepts when we try to pin down exactly what we mean by equitable partnership. So what do we mean by equitable partnerships? So you may have heard some of the other speakers refer to this in the context of their own institutions. We tend to think of this in terms of science being an international collaborative endeavour, and equitable partnerships is one mechanism through which we can help to build ownership, strengthen capacity. It can be more sustainable in the long term, increase efficiency through minimising the risk of duplication, and it can also improve our chances of achieving outcomes and impact. So even just looking at research outputs, internationally collaborative research has been found to gain more attention than national research and is cited more frequently. But the potential increased chance of achieving outcomes and impacts extends to the real world too. So in terms of definitions, some of the key concepts which are emphasised in relation to equitable partnerships include the idea of neutrality, which came out in the Slido poll. So what we mean by this is mutual participation, mutual responsibility, and mutual benefits. There's also a real emphasis on recognition, respect, and equal value placed on each partner's contribution. There's a recognition of the dynamism of partnerships. So these are not static entities, they change over time. So there's a difference between building an equitable partnership and then maintaining and sustaining it. Ultimately, these rely upon power and power sharing and how that plays out in decision making. And that's underpinned by trust, relationships of trust. So for the purposes of this presentation, we'll mainly be focusing upon geographic equity, so thinking about partnerships between high-income country institutions and low and middle-income country institutions, or similarly South-South partnerships. But the approaches that I'm going to outline today could equally be applied to other dimensions of equity. So for example, gender, age, disability, career stage, discipline, and multidisciplinary research. So moving on, so there's a whole wealth of different tools and guidance that are available. These are predominantly aimed at funders, institutions, and individuals who are involved in equitable partnerships. For the purposes of today's presentation, I've paid particular attention to literature that's engaged with global health researchers, so those who've kind of got lived experience of working in these partnerships. One particular recent initiative that's worth flagging is the Equitable Partnership Task Force. So this includes representatives from international funders. And the idea is, in recognising that the principles have been quite clearly set out within the existing guidance and tools, there's a need to move from recognising these principles to actually putting them into practice. So they're looking at gathering best practice examples. So with my monitoring, evaluation and learning hat on, I'm particularly interested in what works. And there's actually a real lack of evidence on what works in building and maintaining an equitable partnership. So traditionally, there's been a lot of reliance upon co-authorship as a measure of partnership dynamics. For example, the graphic that you see on the right-hand side is from the Nature Index, where they've looked at co-authorship as a measure of research collaborations. So the darker circles represent the contribution from domestic-based authors, and then the lighter ring around it represents the contribution from international collaborators. However, there's an increasing recognition of the limitations of relying solely upon co-authorship as a measure of partnership dynamics, because it doesn't fully capture the whole range of activities that can take place within a research collaboration. There are a number of potentially useful frameworks, however, they've not been very well tested to date. So there is a real gap here. There's a real need for effective monitoring, evaluation and learning to both help us understand how to improve a partnership as it's being implemented, but to also understand what works and what doesn't. And that's not to say it comes without challenges. So there's a whole range of methodological challenges in trying to assess what are diverse, complex and dynamic institutional forms. So each partner will come to a partnership with their own objectives. So there can be a feeling of trying to track progress against multiple conflicting and moving targets. As I mentioned earlier, partnerships are dynamic and they change over time. So there's a real need for longitudinal research so that we can observe partnership dynamics and identify if there are any critical factors that contribute to their success or failure. Another key question is whose voices are being heard when we measure equitable partnerships. So there's a real need to think beyond funders, beyond the research leads, to consult the wider research team and even potentially their wider pool of stakeholders to understand how equity is playing out in practice. And the last question is thinking through what level is appropriate for monitoring and evaluation to be conducted at. So some of the measures I'm going to outline are appropriate for funders to be using and quite feasible for funders to be collecting. And there are others that are potentially more suited to being conducted at the partnership level itself. So really the purpose of the evaluation can help us determine which level is the most appropriate to be using each of these measures. So moving on, I'm going to outline some of the opportunities that we've identified for funders to measure equity in partnerships. And in order to do this, I've separated out into 3 main stages. So this is recognizing the dynamism of partnerships and how they can change over time. So there is the before research stage. So this is really thinking about access to resources. And then there's during research. So that's about participation during the course of the research partnership. And then after research, which is very much thinking about outcomes and benefits and how those are shared between partners. And I'm just going to highlight some of the ones that I think are most feasible and appropriate for funders to be looking at. So in the before research stage, I've highlighted access to resources as an area where funders can really look to hone in and measure how equity may be playing out. So for example, we can collect and analyze equality, diversity and inclusion data on who's applying for funding, who's getting through the first sifts, and also the final outcome, so who finally gets awarded the funding. But once funding is in place, it's also important to think about downstream funding flows and how that funding is being divided between different partners. It's also important to combine both the quantitative measures of looking at where the funding is going with qualitative information on how those decisions are being made in practice, as sometimes the majority of funding may be spent by one partner, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting to decide when and how those funds are spent. Another aspect in the before research stage that we can look at is inclusive agenda setting. So during the application stage, thinking through how have the wider community been engaged and consulted in deciding upon what the scope of the research is. And there's some really interesting initiatives in this area. So for example, UNICEF have developed some minimum standards of community engagement with a number of measures that could easily be applied here. Then moving on to the during research stage, we're particularly interested in capacity strengthening. So we'd like to think about this in terms of individual capacity strengthening, but also wider institutional capacity strengthening. At the individual level, it's really important to think beyond the research leads. So how are, for example, early career researchers benefiting from training opportunities? What are the next steps in terms of their careers? And thinking about wider institutional capacity strengthening, what evidence is there that the wider research enabling staff, so all those beyond the core research team, benefiting from capacity strengthening initiatives? The other aspect that I've highlighted during research is data governance. So this is around who collects, who owns, who stores, who accesses, who uses the data. And then lastly, moving on to after research. So this is about the outcomes and benefits of the research. So there's a real need to ensure that we're recognizing the contributions of the full research team. So this goes beyond lead authorship or even co-authorship. And this has really been shown to be key to building and maintaining trust in research collaborations. So one example of how this could be approached in practice is the credit taxonomy, which looks at 14 different roles in every research output and looks to acknowledge the contribution of all of these different participants. So that could be those involved in data collection, as well as those who are analysing, drafting and editing a final research output. And lastly, there's a need to ensure that all those involved in the research collaboration are able to meet their obligations to their wider communities. And again, here the UNICEF minimum standards for community engagement could be used to track this. So now moving on to the next level down, so thinking about the opportunities for those actually involved in the research partnership to be able to measure equity. So there's actually a whole range of different self-assessment toolkits available. I'm just going to speak in particular about the Partnership Assessment Toolkit. So this was developed by partners in Canada, Bangladesh, Ecuador, and Ethiopia, and it consists of a series of workshops, questionnaires, and exercises which encourage those involved in the partnership to self-reflect on how their partnership is operating in practice, and also on the basis of the evidence that they collect through these worksheets and exercises to then have workshops to discuss potential solutions and strategies. So the idea is that these become living documents, so you continually reflect and refine over time and improve the equity within a partnership as it's being conducted. And this really points to the opportunity to embed more participatory research into partnership development. And the advantages of this are that it's collaborative and participative in nature, and it can also be tailored to different contexts. So it will enable us to gather evidence, enable critical reflection, and also importantly, lead to changes in practice. So lastly, just to summarise a few final reflections, equitable partnerships can contribute towards achieving sustainable outcomes and impact. However, there's a real lack of evidence on what works in building and maintaining these. So there's a need for effective monitoring and evaluation and learning to understand what works and what doesn't, and also critically how these partnerships change over time. In doing this monitoring and evaluation and learning, there's a need to look beyond the traditional measures of focusing on lead applicants and authorship, but there's a real potential to apply mixed methods here. So the potential for combining funder level measures with more participatory partnership level research and embedded learning activities. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I'm going to be handing over to Sophie to start the discussion. But just as part of that discussion, I'm particularly keen to hear from the audience about your own experiences of how equity has played out in research partnerships that you've been involved in, and any aspects that you think we should be incorporating into the way that we look at monitoring and evaluating these partnerships. And I'm also really keen to hear from anyone who has experience in monitoring and measuring any of these aspects of equitable partnerships and how you've gone about approaching this. So thanks. I'll hand back over to Sophie now.
Thanks so much, Carrie, and thank you to all of our panelists for a really interesting set of thought-provoking presentations. We'll now move on to the discussion part of our session, and glad to see many questions that have been coming in through the chat box, which will make for really interesting discussions. Please continue to use the thumbs up the function to help us prioritize questions that are coming through. So there've been a kind of several themes, or quite a lot of themes actually, that have been coming through the Q&A box already. One of them is around sustainability. So I'll start off with one of the questions that we've received, which is, what enables funding schemes to sustain over time so that LMIC research institutions can mentor applications over time as research priorities with local partners evolve? So this is thinking about mentorship, sustainability of funding schemes over time, and thinking about shifting priorities. So I wondered if I could start with you, Val, to see if you had any thoughts on this point.
Yes, thank you, Sophie, and also to say thank you very much to everyone, all the speakers. Yeah, I've been seeing there's some really excellent questions and comments coming up in the chat, so thank you, and do keep them coming in response to all the speakers. I thought, yeah, I can mention a little bit about basically size and longevity of grant funding, research funding and contracts. A general issue, really, obviously not just for us as a funder, but to answer that question about from our perspective, we've only really been going since 2016. So one question was, how long are we making awards for? Well, like most funders, we have a natural kind of life cycle of budgeting. So the maximum time scale for our awards is really 5 years. However, looking back at other funders like Wellcome, who have been going for longer, certainly some of those programs have now been already going for 10 years as research capacity strengthening initiatives in Africa, starting with the African Institutions Initiative and then Deltas. And Tom is best kind of able to speak in more detail on those. That's just being renewed now with the new application. In our own programs through NIHR, the NIHR Global Health Research Units were for 4 years in the first instance, and that scheme is now open. And the point about funders' life cycles is, if we gave a commitment to just continue funding for 10 to 15 years, as I saw in the chat box, some funders have been doing. The challenge that say us and Wellcome would say to that is that there's no opportunity for new entrants to come in. So it's an equity issue actually for us that every 5 years or 4 years, the schemes are open to new entrants. Existing entrants, of course, are in a very good position to get refunded. And we've seen that through some of these long-lived initiatives where funders, and Tom might comment on this, where funders do see this. Good applications, of course, come in from institutions and individuals who have funding. But from an equity perspective, I think it would be good to hear what people think about those opportunities for new entrants. So I was just also going to touch on, I saw Lucy Gilson and others have commented on also the need for smaller amounts of money and smaller startup awards. So I would like to balance my answer with both those points. I could maybe have mentioned in my slides, we do have a small grant scheme. It's administered by RSTMH, which is the Royal Society for Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. Recognizing again in the chat, there's been discussion about how do we get these opportunities out there, and I think it's possibly another question we should pick up. But we do have a small grant scheme at the moment. And also, I think Sarah Puddicombe's mentioned in the chat, through NIHR, the Global Health Policy and Systems Research Call, which is specifically around health systems research, has funded 17 development awards through a very novel mechanism for us, which is a planning grant, a planning award, which is specifically around building and developing stakeholder relationships. So I'd like to answer the question around, it is around scale and diversity, and having that diverse range of funding opportunities, some larger and some smaller, but also even in the larger, I think we feel having the opportunity for new entrants to come in is equally important. So maybe I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Val. Tom, did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I agree with everything that Val has said. That, you know, when we put out a call and we're inviting people to come together and to form a consortium, the hope is always that they're not going to build one that is going to be around for a year or 2 years or 5 years. We hope that they are doing this for the long horizon. However, I think there is always an understanding that funders have their own cycles of funding, and they may exit at some time, and their new ones may come on. And I think the underlying thing is to say, can the consortium survive over the initial funders and sponsors who come together to launch them? And are they able to continue to attract more people? And including, for example, we are very, very interested at the AESA platform. Are they able to provide, to identify new sources of funding, including local sources, including businesses from Africa, including other partners that come from all over the world who can continue to support them? That's what we are looking for as a mark of sustainability moving forward. I think the other area is to say that, we are also very concerned, something that Val said, I want to emphasize, that we are very concerned that money from big funders like NIHR and others, that the money is always going to the usual centers, the usual institutions, and one can map them or count them in the 10 fingers of their hand from across the continent. So we want to see more, and this is a very important aspect of equity. But we recognize the fact that some have the capacities and the capabilities to be the lead institutions. With Delta as an example, the guidance has always been that if you are putting together a consortium, we want to see how you're pulling in new partners from weaker organizations or the ones that need more support, and you can then put together and use that 5 years of support that you're going to receive to actually pull them up, and so that by the next cycle of funding they are in a much better placed for them to become the leaders themselves moving forward. That's what we would like to see.
Thank you, and that ties in really well with our kind of next point of discussion around how we kind of overcome a poor track record for institutions who historically haven't had the same academic track records or haven't had the same successful experiences of obtaining grants. And so kind of putting them in consortia with other institutions that have that track record is one way to kind of help to strengthen their capacity. Wondering if anyone has any thoughts of any other ways that this could be strengthened. So thinking about institutions that haven't had the track record of obtaining these grants and how we might be able to support them in building capacity. I wondered if Hezbollah or Akin, if you have any thoughts on this. We'll start with Hezbollah.
Sorry, I missed the question. Sorry, if you can come up again.
I can repeat it. So the question was around the challenges of relatively weak research institutions that are lacking in the academic track record or lacking in successful grant applications. And so how can we ensure that we can help to strengthen capacity of such institutions? So I wondered, through your experience and kind of involvement in training, working with other institutions, if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just share some of the things that we are doing at APHRC. I mentioned the long-term commitments. So for our research capacity strengthening mandate, we are keen on strengthening capacity of individuals as well as institutions. So for our short courses, which is what most people come for, or the strategy through which we can reach many individuals and institutions, we work either with individual institutions. So we tailor the training to individuals, the institution, or we do it for the public. So we've realized that if we do it for the public, the demand is there, but they end up having issues with we can't participate because of funding and things like that. But we've realized that if we have many people express interest, there's a way we can work on the cause so that we are still able to reach many people who, of course, the demand is there. Another strategy that we have used, but again, this one is now limiting in terms of the number, is through those long-term fellowships. The 2-year or the 5-year fellowships. So we tend to use the short courses approach because we are able to reach many people, and it is more appealing because it is very difficult for people to leave their work and commit to that long-term engagement. Thank you.
Thanks, Hezbollah. Akin, did you have anything to add to that?
So thank you very much, Sophie. I was just writing in the byline there that one way to achieve that is also from the funders to provide more opportunities, grants that allows for networking between institutions in Africa or within low middle income countries, and also between low middle income countries and higher income countries. So grant that allow for that kind of collaboration, networking with institutions with stronger research infrastructure would really go a long way to help achieve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Val, did you want to come back in?
Thanks. I was just going to add, thank you very much, everyone, for comments on this. I think that these ideas that are coming in, it's extremely interesting and useful to us to hear the things that are most on people's minds. We in NIHR, we're about to launch another major call for these big centres, which will be consortium and networks. So I think we're definitely building in ideas and opportunities to establish those networking opportunities. But as I would just reiterate, as well as those opportunities that we have developed through the NIHR programme and through partnerships such as with the small grant scheme that I was talking about, I think the key thing that we need to also build in is those regional and local opportunities. So I would say some of the chat has been about how do people hear about things, and in Africa, for example, I would point people to the African Academy of Sciences and the mailing list, for example, where opportunities go out. And I'm less aware and familiar with other regions, but I would imagine that your national research funding organisations might again be the place where some of these opportunities for local networking or regional networking might actually sit better than with an international funder. So as part of the whole landscape, it would be good for us to know a bit more about that as well, actually, from funders sitting where we sit, for example, in the UK. So that was what I was going to add. Thank you. Just think about that from your own regional, national and local levels. And if they don't exist, maybe as a research communities to start calling for them might be a good way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. That kind of brings us into our next point, which was around the kind of knowledge and awareness of funding schemes across global health, and thinking about, do we know these are kind of often managed, potentially siloed by funder, but is there a kind of opportunity to share these learnings more generally, and can Health Systems Global play a role in that? So wondering if anyone has any thoughts on kind of how to help get those messages out and ensure that that researchers around the world are aware of the different schemes and what they kind of really mean, understanding those funding cycles. Tom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you know, I think part of the shifting the gravity means that, like Val has actually put it very, very nicely, is, you know, there is a level of responsibility required of all of us who are taking the lead in our own regions, and that goes. It's not just for me as a Pan-African organization, the African Academy of Sciences and the AESA platform, but it's also the institutions themselves and what sort of leadership they can take within their own regions. So two or three issues. One I think is that every time we put out some calls, it's interesting the kind of data that we see. So for example, if we put out a call for postdoctoral support, we know almost inevitably that we will be flooded with applications from, for example, Southern Africa. Sometimes when we put out a call for, say, climate sciences, I can expect to see a lot of applications from Nigeria, which is good, and West Africa, actually. And unfortunately, we don't see that many applications from Central Africa, and I can mention a few countries in the, in the middle of the continent. So I think this is how it becomes very important. One thing that we find is that the more institutions invest in building their own research support or research management offices, the better they become in terms of the things that Hesbon was actually addressing, building their own grantsmanship and all the skills that are required. Because a good research office would have the kind of people, staffing, experts who come together to support them. I have had a lot of anecdotes about our grantees who then you ask them, how did you find about our call? There are many ways. Some will say, we are on your mailing list, which I think it's more than 10, 15,000 people. That is managed by colleague Juliet, and anybody can then go in and subscribe. And some other tell me, actually, particularly from Southern Africa and the big universities there, they tell us it is our research support offices that actually alerted us to this opportunity. So we need to challenge each other. For example, those of us in Africa, challenge each other as higher education institutions. How are we building our own? And through the research management program for Africa at the African Academy of Sciences, led by my colleague Alan, this is the other issues that we want to address. It's about institutional leadership. It's about individuals who are trained in as research managers or research administrators. It is about how we then start, develop a standard that can be put across all these institutions, and they can begin to build their own capacities for managing grants or connecting with partners or mobilizing resources, whether they are bronze, silver, gold, platinum, if they want to get to that level. This is all about what it takes to, it's a journey and it will take time.
Great, thank you. We have an interesting question next that has come up. Where does accountability lie for inequitable research partnerships? Carrie, I wondered if you'd start us up with any thoughts on that.
Sure, happy to jump in here. I think it's kind of multi-leveled, a bit like how I outlined in my approach. I think there is a responsibility for funders to be looking at how equitable research partnerships are in practice. But as I mentioned, there are only so many things that we're able to look at from our lens. So there's a real need to ensure that we're trying to embed principles that can then be followed up and promulgated through at the partnership level itself. However, I think there is a real need across the piece for more evidence on this, because it's very hard to know and keep ourselves to account if we're not collecting evidence on it. So there's a need for both funders to be ensuring that we're monitoring this, but also for those involved in the partnerships themselves to be holding themselves to account. And importantly, I think that's the position where there's the most potential for change to happen once funding's in place.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in and pick up on that? Resounding silence. Okay, we can move on to the next question. We have a comment and a question, which I will, for the sake of ease, read out. So, what opportunities are there to link the discussions about equity in research, processes and outputs with really critical discussions that are happening about leveling the playing field in the inputs, i.e. the financing for research? Is it always difficult to redistribute power when resources are at stake? Can we explore in parallel models for global public investments for health systems research, which is a global public good? So quite a lot of points within that, looking at kind of equity in research and the kind of leveling the playing field. So thinking both about the inputs, what we, I guess, as funders are doing, and thinking about how that relates to some of the processes and outputs. Val, do you have any thoughts initially on that comment and question?
Well, no, thank you. Thank you for the question. There's quite a few elements in that. I guess I wanted to touch on, as we are in, excuse me, in a health systems meeting, I saw there were a few comments specifically around health systems research and maybe how it is different, as comments have said, as underpinning really the response in many other areas. It is essential to have the health systems research in place. So I can't answer really from the whole global world, but we are looking at that. Obviously, our foundation as NIHR, with our funding arm, is the UK National Health Service, the NHS. And colleagues I know are on this call specifically from the part of NIHR that delivers health systems, our health systems global calls, which is the Global Health Policy Systems Research call. So we do recognise that health systems research and health policy and systems research is different, and we have set up a scheme specifically for that. There's also collaborative schemes, the Health Systems Research Initiative, APHRC, which UK funders jointly fund to again get mutual benefit from working together in this area. I would agree that I think COVID-19, for example, has again demonstrated the need for a more universal approach to funding the research for health systems research. And I think some of the comments have been around the role of Health Systems Global itself as a network. So I would really open it up also to say, is there, as an outcome of this meeting, for example, there may be some really constructive and positive calls that can be made to the research funding community, the international research funding community, in how we can best respond together in this area. The COVID-19 response call that we funded, the global effort for COVID-19 health research, which we call GECCO, that was specifically targeting areas of the WHO roadmap, for example. And I think funders, we want to listen and we want to respond. Sometimes we don't know quite who to ask. So of course we would look to WHO, we would look to other bodies. But I would say to the community listening here that if you have thoughts, maybe feed those in through Health Systems Global and try and get a unified solution to some of the challenges that you're giving us as funders. And we are very connected up with other international funders and very keen and happy to work together in a more coordinated way. So yeah, feel free to give us more ammunition. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. On the kind of topic of health systems, we've had some questions, as you've mentioned, specifically on health systems. And so here's one that was around the African Academy of Sciences and the AESA platform. Has NIHR or AESA thought about the specific needs of health policy and systems research in low and middle income countries or in Africa? There may be some different needs, even as some are shared. Tom, I wonder if you want to comment on that.
Just very quickly on the last point, because I think it was important. I think there is an aspect of trust and confidentiality and building those kind of mutual respect between various groups that are working in a space, because it's interesting when I go out and I am talking about what kind of players are we focusing on to bring more support for science for Africa. It could be global funders like some of us, like DHSC, or it could be a smaller organization in terms of AESA platform, small by comparison, or it could be, for example, the question I get asked a lot of time is, what about the private sector? How much of the big biopharma companies that are selling their products in Africa, how many of them are putting money into R&D in Africa? And that's an interesting one, because there is always tensions there. People would actually say, well, the tensions have to be that I don't trust my data to be shared. And others might say the tensions are about who are the beneficiaries. Are the communities actually going to be benefits on this? So that's an interesting one. But I think going back to the next question, I think policies, practices, and products are part of the journey that we all want to get into. And in building policies, I think it also starts from a recognition that different organizations and higher education institutions, and even at the government level, as we have learned during COVID, that there are failures at all levels. As we start thinking about how we then get into policies, we need to think about how do we support them. So one of the things, for example, as a very specific example, is we've been telling our grantees to the whole area around how do you build your research culture, whether it is gender issues and policies that are important for that, to safeguarding, to whistleblowing, anti-bribery, corruption issues, paternity and maternity and travel issues. We are asking them to address all of those. So as we get into those policies, guidelines, and practices, we want to get away from just making a recommendation to actually then asking all the institutions to tell us exactly how they are doing this and how they are moving to a better place as part of an example of that.
Thanks, Tom. That's really interesting, really good to hear. In the interest of time, I'll just try and cover as many other questions as we can get to. We have a question around the time span for the NIHR funding commitments. And as an example, CEDA used to commit for over 10 to 15 year periods through its renewable research funding, allowing scientific capacity of individuals and institutions to be strengthened. I wondered if Carrie might be able to talk to to that in terms of some of the longer term objectives of NIHR funding?
Sure, I think Val's probably covered the point around the funding cycles that we're at the mercy of. However, we do have very much longer term objectives. So in line with a lot of other ODA funded research, we are aiming to contribute towards a sustainable development goal. So we are thinking very much long term to 2030. And the challenge that we face is trying to work out how we can measure and monitor our contribution at kind of intermediary proxy stages towards that. So we think very much about measuring research outputs, measuring engagement with policymakers and practitioners, and then ultimately hoping to see a contribution to changes in policy practice and individual behaviour.
Great, thank you. Val, did you want to add anything else to that?
Nothing else to add specifically on that, but I was just going to go back a bit to the health policy and systems research question and just say that calls and opportunities will be coming out despite the fact that we're all interested in COVID-19 research and have been amending programs and timelines accordingly. We are very aware that research goes on in all other areas. So I just wanted to give a plug to the to our Twitter feed and encourage people to sign up for information. I recognize that's just from us, but I would encourage people to have a look also on the website as we have a program of calls which will come out specifically for global health policy and systems research coming up next year, and this time to prepare is now. And also some of the other activities that that we've been talking about. So recognizing that we are just one funder, and I think we do want to work together to promote activities better. I just wanted to give a bit of a plug for people who maybe feel, well, I don't know what's coming up and I don't know how to hear about it. Please do look at the African Academy of Sciences new mailing list. We are looking at partnering at the moment with the African Academy of Science. I hope that's okay, Tom, to mention, to get more involved and more directly involved with them. And we also have opportunities with other funders working together. So I was just going to give a bit of a plug to please sign up, and at least you'll be feeling a bit more in the loop. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. And you may have seen in some of the discussion boxes and the Q&A, I think we've also had links to the upcoming newsletter as well, which please do sign up for any future opportunities. We've had some discussion around examples and case studies of equitable partnerships and ensuring kind of thinking about developing a repository for these kind of successful case studies, which would be really interesting. I wondered if Akin, to start off with you, do you have any kind of examples that you'd be able to share of times where you've had successful working relationships in equitable research partnerships? You're muted if you're speaking.
Sorry, my microphone was not on. I just unmuted my microphone now. I'll give specific examples of previous partnership that we considered equitable. Example is the Siren program. The Siren program was funded by the NIH, which is the largest study of stroke in Africa, essentially a case control study with nearly 5,000 participants. So it was a big study, you know, and we had partners all across the US, and we found that, you know, particularly helpful in terms of partnership. Another example is the Thrive study, which is more like an intervention study, also funded by the NIH, and also it's another example of good partnership that we've had. But what really made this partnership equitable were resource sharing, as most of the project resources came to the low middle income country partner. In fact, the funding specified that most resources should come to the LAMIC partner. And I think for funders, this is a very important way to help build equitable partnership between high income and low-income country. Another thing that made the partnership equitable was also the intellectual product. So the authorship of these two programs that I mentioned came from the LAMIC partner, in this case, Nigeria. And then, of course, the ownership of the data, was also Nigeria actually owned the data for these two large projects. So we found those two programs that I mentioned particularly equitable in terms of our relationship with high-income countries. And of course, the program also allowed us to build capacity. So, for example, many of the high-income country academics during the program, and of course, people developed statistical and data management skills, research management skills, grantsmanship skills from this program. So I believe programs that have these qualities, allowing for resource sharing to be equitable, intellectual property to be led by the low-income country partners, and then of course ownership of data. I think if we have more programs like this, will really be very helpful.
Great, thanks so much, Akin. Thank you. Hesbon, I wondered if you had any thoughts from your perspective on kind of equitable partnerships and your experience working in these.
Yeah, just very briefly, I mentioned about the CATA program, which is a consortium of 8 African institutions, universities for that matter. We also have 4 African research organizations, as well as some northern partners. And I would consider it as one of those equitable, partnership, in the sense that it has empowered the African partners to really engage in public health, projects really broad. If I had time, I could share the success stories from CATA program, in terms of attaching grant worth of several millions of dollars, as well as publication and the like. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I may not go deeper just because of time, so I can share more.
Thanks very much, Hesbon. Great, thank you. In the interest of time, as we're coming to the end of our session, I thought we'd go around to all panelists and for everyone to give any kind of final reflections, especially picking up on any kind of points that we haven't been able to get to in the discussion, that we know there's a lot that's been coming through the chat box, and we will try and pick up as many of these as we can through various outputs from the event. But if you have any kind of final reflections or additional comments, please let us know. So I'll start off with Val.
Oh, thank you, Sophie. Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I saw actually even Lucy volunteering to help us review health policy and systems research grants, I think. So we'll definitely follow up on the comments in the chat. So yes, offers to review and applications through our open calls to become reviewers. Very, very welcome. My point I wanted to say, I know we don't have a lot of time for you to comment now in the chat, was just to go back to the points we were making around institutional champions, as we called it, for how to cascade some of the concepts that maybe are familiar to us as funders sitting where we sit in the UK, and how to get those out to an institutional and maybe a regional level. So I know that, as I say, there isn't an awful lot of time left, but we'd be really keen to hear how that lands with some of you working in institutions who maybe feel you don't have a great line of sight into funding opportunities, and maybe you don't have a lot of experience in competing and winning global funding. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity of just getting comments captured in the chat box. From that, picking up on, we've worked with 4 organizations recently. We're keen to hear what else would be useful in this world, in this area, and we're keen to work with others to help deliver them. I saw quite a few comments around the Health Systems Global Network, and I was going to just mention that the Health Policy and Systems Research suite of calls, which we're kind of halfway through at the moment, that we had direct engagement with Health Systems Global Network and had a Slack channel specifically as well to facilitate feedback, which directly led to shaping that call. So we're very keen to have champions, not just maybe at the institutional level, but also with existing networks and existing audience spaces who might like to work with us and other funders to help cascade messages. And as I say, I know Tom and the African Academy of Science in Africa is doing a lot of this already. So these stories of equitable partnerships, many of the examples mentioned here are actually things that have been funded by the AESA platform, the research programs platform within the African Academy of Sciences. So I'll stop there. I know there's probably a few points there, but please do continue to comment in, especially any thoughts on that, how to pick up on the institutional champion idea for how do we become more scalable and sustainable in our communications around research funding opportunities and equity as we go forward into the next phase of our award process. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Hesbon, I wondered in 30 seconds if you could give your concluding remarks.
Wow, 30 seconds. I know you started counting. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I've learned quite a lot from this interaction. One thing I wanted to mention is we should try very much to ensure access to information, because sometimes you can't act on information that you don't have. And strategies to make sure that relevant information is able to reach the target audience is key. And particularly pointing at the AESA platform, the one that Tom talked about. Maybe my colleagues are familiar with it, but personally I've not had a chance to do that. So I'll be keen to join the mailing list and benefit from that. And as I do that, because I also am connected with different institutions, I know naturally then they will be able to benefit. So that would be my concluding remark. I know I went up to 31 seconds.
Thank you very much, Hesbon. Akin.
Unmute.
You're still muted. We will be booted off the platform in 3 minutes. So as succinct as you can, please.
So, yeah, I was talking about the possibility to allow researchers to researchers' input in the design of funding program for the future. So if a funding program is designed for Africa or low middle income countries, then it will be important for researchers within that environment, that context, to have their own input in designing the program. For the future, if this will be allowed or possible by the funders. Then of course, more research grants for training and grantsmanship skills will be welcome for the future. Thank you very much, Sophie.
Thanks very much, Akin. Tom, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to encourage what Val has said. So we have a lot of information. We want to connect with everybody around the continent and globally. So please, if you can get in through the African Academy of Sciences website, you'll find the AESA platform and you'll find a lot of information there, and you can sign up. And if you even just dropping an email to our communications at asciences.africa would actually do very well. But I just want to add by saying that as we think about the future, I think it's very, very important we start thinking about these knowledge issues around how do we move from data that we are generating to evidence that is actually going to be impactful. And one of the questions I think for all of us that we'll be reaching out to a lot of discussions is how do we build these sort of knowledge platforms in Africa that actually would be impactful. I have an example, for example, a very quick one where we want African researchers to have, affordability for high performance computing, cloud computing. But there are many, many questions there to think about: data, who is going to be responsible for storage that, how do we make sure that governance and architecture for data is in place, who is going to be manning that? So many questions, but that could be another subject for another discussion in future about how do you build data around equitable partnerships that are actually going to make everybody feel comfortable with their data.
Definitely. Carrie, very, very briefly, we've got less than a minute left. Race against the clock.
I will race through then. Just to flag, it's been an incredibly interesting discussion, and to pick up on the point around access to information, I think there's also a role for funders to be playing to try and demystify what is quite a complex funding landscape. And just to flag that I know there are currently discussions in place to see how we can better do that as UK ODA funders to ensure that all of our funding opportunities are collated into one spot. And lastly,
I'm really sorry to interrupt, Carrie. We've got 10 seconds left, so we're just going to
Go
wrap
ahead.
up this session. Thank you so much for everyone joining today. Please do follow us on Twitter and sign up to our newsletter, and continue to engage and look out for our outputs that are coming. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sophie.
Bye everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks for
everyone.
joining.
Thanks all. Bye.
Bye.